Jess. I'm here to talk with you about an introduction to OpenTelemetry. How many people here have heard of OpenTelemetry? Raise your hands. Cool. So when I got started with this, I didn't actually know that much about OpenTelemetry, and I'm here to tell you my story with it, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to figure out how to integrate it into your applications. So I'm Jessica Garson, and I can be found most places on the internet at Jessica Garson. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, cool. And if you're on Mastodon, I'm Jessica Garson at macaw.social, and I'm a senior developer advocate. I'm originally from the DC area, and I actually live in New York these days. I learned how to code through the DC tech community. I used to run a meetup here called Hack and Tell back in the day. And I haven't spoken at a conference in DC in like a really long time. So I saw that this had a CFP open, and I was like, oh, I miss the DC tech community. So I'm really excited to be here. And I love this community a lot. So all of the code I'll be sharing today, everything can be found on my GitHub. Jessica Garson, Introduction to OpenTelemetry with Python. So feel free to follow along. About half of this is going to be live demos, half of it will be recordings. So trying that, let me know how you think about that. I'm typically like a live demo type of person. So today we're going to be talking about observability, which may be reviewed for some of you. We're going to also talk about what OpenTelemetry is and how to use it, and then from there I'm going to show you some examples of Django and Flask instrumentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about the state of OpenTelemetry in general, and then we'll have some time for conclusion and next steps. So I took a little bit of a break after 2022, and I started working on Elastic about a year after I took a break, and I heard everybody talking about OpenTelemetry, and I was like, I knew about open tracing and open census, but like I hadn't really been in the observability space in a minute, and I was like, I don't know that much about this. So I tried to find like a short primer on like getting started with OpenTelemetry with Python. How many people here are Python developers? Cool, awesome, a couple of you. And all I could find was this like demo application, and it kind of went over my head. How many people here have tried to like follow a tutorial, and you're like, I don't really understand what's happening, and like now I actually think it's a really good tutorial, but like I had a chance to kind of play with it, and so I'm hoping that you walk away from this with a strong understanding of like how to get started with OpenTelemetry. I also asked ChatGPT, my friend and your friend, to explain OpenTelemetry to me like I was 5, which I sometimes do if I don't know a concept, and I think it like kind of fixated on the 5-year-old part, because it told me that OpenTelemetry is like having a magical friend that watches you draw and tells me like when my crayons break and why they break. And like, that's one way of explaining OpenTelemetry. I don't think that's how I would explain OpenTelemetry. So yeah, so I'm really hoping that you have a strong understanding of what it is and how to start using it. So I'm gonna start with some observability fundamentals. How many people feel really comfortable with observability? Okay, great, awesome. So how many people observability helps you determine what's happening inside your system by kind of taking a look at the data that it outputs. It's about kind of the why behind the state that you're in is the way that I like to think about it. And it's kind of like making sense of everything that your systems output. And so I'm a cat mom, and I think about this a lot when I think about my cat. So what do you all think is happening to this cat right now? I hear that a lot. Sometimes I hear belly rub. I think it's kind of like meowing, like really loudly. I might have seen like another cat or something like that. But my cat often will tell me a lot, like when it needs fresh air, it will actually literally try to open the window, which is like really funny to me because it has like tiny cat arms. When she wants water or food, she'll meow at the water fountain or where the food is, or sometimes she'll walk me to the food. So like she tells me what's happening. And our systems also kind of act in that same way. They offer hints as to what's going on behind the hood. And so observability is really not only like what's not happening as expected, and that's part of it, but also like why, what's going on. And it goes beyond detecting problems. It's also figuring out like who is being impacted by what and like why. So I heard a lot of like, as I was getting more into the observability space, I heard a lot of like jargon that like I found very confusing at first. So I'm going to try to demystify some of that. So one of the first things I heard is, what is an agent? And I was like, what is an agent? Like, I've heard a lot about agents. We have an agent called APM, but I was like, what is that? I work at Elastic, by the way. I don't know if I said that, but yeah. An observability agent is a software component that collects or processes telemetry data from a system or application to an observability platform for analysis. So a lot of times people will talk about the 3 pillars of observability, and I'll go through what those are. Those are metrics, logs, and traces. So logs are kind of a record of what's happening in the system. It's basically things that you could print out. For many of us, our first program was a log. We printed hello world to a console. Print statements are a method of logging. They're probably not the most sophisticated method of logging, but they are a method of logging nonetheless. But they're really just things that like print out. And then metrics are a quantitative metric that tracks the performance of a system. These are aggregation and numbers. And then traces track the path and interactions of a request through a system. So OpenTelemetry is a observability framework that is open source and vendor neutral. It is designed to work with any backend system, and it provides a set of standardized APIs, libraries, and tools to collect telemetry data such as metrics, logs, and traces. And OpenTelemetry really enables us to kind of take a look at our system as a whole. So why? Why use it? For me, I've had the experience of going into an old code base and being like, what is going on here? And I actually have this log from something that I was recently building. And if you looked at it, I'm actually hitting the NASA Near Earth Object web service, which is a REST API that gives you information about when asteroids are coming close to Earth. So if you looked at this log, you'd be like, what is she building? Like, what? Is she building a spaceship? Like, what's going on here? And like, I've had this experience a lot where I've like tried to make sense of logs. I'm like, I just don't know. And so because most of us, we work with complicated interconnected systems with lots of microservices, being able to make sense of it all is really, really helpful. And then one of my favorite parts of OpenTelemetry in general is that it is future-proof. It is designed to work with any framework that you choose to work with. How many people have used like a system that you thought you were going to be using forever? I used Fogbugs in 2011 and I loved it. And I was like, oh my God, I'll always use this for like bug tracking. And obviously Jira is like what's now used. And so, you know, as we kind of shift towards new and different products, the idea is that you'll always be able to kind of monitor all of your systems in the same way with the same language. And so my friend actually referred to it as the language that everyone is speaking. And I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. So one of the things that tripped me up at first when I was getting started with OpenTelemetry was the concept of spans within traces. And so spans, they're the building block of traces. So they include the following information: a name and a parent span ID. So one way of thinking about it is that a trace is a family and a span is a member of a family. And I think that that's a really cool way of kind of thinking through that. And it wasn't until I actually saw this printed out on my console that I was like, oh, a span within a trace. I get it. Okay, cool. Like, that makes sense to me. All right, and like, this is from a Python application, and I was able to see the trace ID and the span ID, and I was like, oh, I understand what's happening here. Cool. And so for me, that was kind of like my aha moment when I was like, okay, cool. And that, what you just saw, is the output of an instrumented application. So instrumenting refers to the process of adding different observability features to your application. And you could collect telemetry data such as traces, metrics, and logs through that. And so today I'm going to actually be talking about 2 Python frameworks, Flask and Django. How many people have used those? Cool. How many people use a different Python web framework? Yay. Okay, cool. It should be similar, though. And so I'm going to be talking through the classic Django example. How many people have built an application that looks like this? I learned how to code in the year 2012, 2011, and this was like, I feel like every coding class I took had an example like this. And I actually really like it for kind of showing basic features. So you might be wondering, Jess, like you showed me that screenshot earlier, but like how did you get that data to show in your console? And so the first thing that I did was I pip installed Django environment, which helps me work with my secrets and keeps everything a little bit more secure. Elastic OpenTelemetry, which is the Elastic wrapper around the OpenTelemetry distribution. And then there's also the instrumentation, or OpenTelemetry instrumentation for Django. And then from there, I was able to install everything I needed to get started. So the first thing I did was I set up my .env file, which had my API key. I'm using Elastic as my backend, but you could really use any observability provider that supports OpenTelemetry that you wish. And then from here, I just set up my environment or my settings.py to read my environment variables. And then from here, I can actually call it within the main function to print to my console. So where it says console exporter, console span exporter, that's where I'm like, hey, can you output this to my console? And so there's two types of instrumentation. One is automatic instrumentation, and the other is manual instrumentation. So automatic instrumentation is the process by which an agent modifies bytecode to your application's classes to insert monitoring code. And so really the way that I like to think about that is that it will automatically add all of the observability features that you want it to, which is pretty cool. I know that I've not monitored my applications because I'm like, oh my God, that's going to take too long, and I find it really easy to work with. So to do that, all you have to do is, there's this one line of code that's like Django instrumenter.instrument, and from there, you just set that up, and it should be good to go after you have all your like environment variables and everything set up. So let's watch a demo of me doing this. So this is me running it in my server, or running in my terminal, being like, hey, I'm just going to run this locally, this Django application. And then from here, it's going to load in a second. And this is kind of like you just run this Python manage.py run server. And then from here, I can add a new item to my to-do list application. So I could be like, hey, I have a new item, exclamation point. And then I could say something like, yay, a new task, cool. And then from here, I can add another one if I want. And this is just a very simple application to kind of show what this looks like. And so from here, I could go in and add my new task. So I'm giving a talk, obviously. So from here, yeah. And about half of these are going to be live demos. The other half are going to be recorded, just to kind of, sometimes things don't go as planned, as I'm sure you all know. Let's go forward a little bit. Cool. So inside of Elastic, you can actually go where it says services, and then from here, you could click and see that to-do list application, and then you can actually see everything inputted into Elastic. And again, Elastic is just one of many backends that you can use. And so from here, you can actually see the latency, the throughput, the transactions, and all of that in here. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Cool. So manual instrumentation allows you to kind of be a little bit more precise. You can actually choose what observability features you want to add. You can like make it your own, and that can be really helpful. I know for me, sometimes I just want, I know parts of my code base might be more troublesome than others. I have things I want to see. As a developer myself, I often will want to use manual instrumentation just because it's more helpful. And so the first thing is just delete that line, Django instrumenter.instrument. You just don't want that in there. And then from there, you can actually set up your views.py file to have a custom tracer. You can set up some metrics, so you can create a counter to have the number of requests. You can also create a histogram. There's a lot that you can do. And then from here, you're just going to want to set up your request. And then from here, you can actually customize it with the span and everything, kind of getting that in there. And you can have both custom spans and metrics, which is pretty cool. And then from there, you can actually see that for each item of the to-do list. So you could see add, delete, and then from here, you can update your models.py file. And then you'd want to run this locally, Python manage.py, run server, and I actually have this up and running, yay, for live demos. And so from here, let's actually go in and let's add a new item. And cool. And so now we can actually delete one, and then we can go into Elastic, and we can see this here as well. And it sometimes takes a minute to load. Cool. That worked. Yay. Cool. So from here we can actually see our item view. We could see our index view span, and we could kind of see everything in here. And we can actually take a look and see what this looks like. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Flask. I really like the Flask instrumentation process, especially for automatic instrumentation. I think it's one of the coolest things I've seen in the Python ecosystem in a while. I think that's the reason I dug into this topic, because as soon as I can get everything working, so you don't have to actually add any code to your application for automatic instrumentation with Flask, which is done with a trick within the Python path that the language hooks into, which is really, really cool, in my opinion. So this is the application that I have running. It has no observability code. It has this very ugly inline CSS, but no observability code added in here. And really, all I have to do to run this locally is just pip install Elastic OpenTelemetry or whatever version of the OpenTelemetry distro you want to use, and then from here, bootstrap install that, set up your environment variables, and then it's just how you run the application. So OpenTelemetry instrument Flask run, and then from here, you can actually see that. So we had that up and running. If I go to services, and if I go to Flask to-do list application, and actually, let's actually go in. I made them look a little bit different just so I could tell the difference. Cool. All right. Now, that's not the right one. Yay. Cool. So, yeah, it's going to take a second. Yeah, this sometimes can lag a couple, but well, we'll come back to that in a minute, but cool. Let's continue on, because it should look very similar to before. So from here, we have all of that. And the manual instrumentation is a little bit different. I'm actually going to go back, though. Sometimes that works. There could be up to a 5-minute lag, depending on the internet. So, okay, well, I'll share a screenshot. I think there is a screenshot on my GitHub repository. So manual instrumentation is very similar to before. So let's take a look at the code inside of GitHub. So from here, we can actually see we have to import a bunch of stuff. And then from here, since it's a Flask application, it's all one big file. And then from here, we can actually we could set up our meter, we could set up all of our code and everything so that we have our custom metrics and spans. And so we can actually customize it to fit whatever, however we want. So we can have different things, and we can make it our own, which I think is really cool about manual instrumentation. So let's watch a demo. So from here, I'm just running this locally. And again, I run this just as I would run any other Flask app. I don't have to do anything different. And then from here, I can just type in hi and have a new task. And then from here, just put in hello as well. And I can delete it, and then from there, I can actually take a look at the manual instrumentation, and then we kind of can see everything up and running in here as well, which is pretty cool. Awesome. And I'm just going to check one thing. Cool, that should have worked, but sometimes it doesn't, which is cool. Yay for live demos. Cool. So there's another way that you can do this as well, too, which is the OpenTelemetry Collector. So this is a solution for receiving and processing and exporting telemetry data, and it's really just a YAML file that you configure. From here, what you can do is you can take a look at the main OpenTelemetry demo. I really like it. It sets up like a telescope store. So from here, this is the Elastic fork of the main OpenTelemetry demo. And really, the first thing that you'd want to do is you'd want to clone that inside of your local repository. Just to get it up and running. And what I like about the OpenTelemetry demo is that what I showed you is a little bit of just like a very basic application. the OpenTelemetry demo actually shows you what kind of a more realistic application would look like. So from here inside of Elastic, what I would do is I would actually kind of go in, do the same thing I've been doing. I'd go to services, or I'd first get my keys and tokens, and then I could grab that under where it says OpenTelemetry, down below right where it says APM agents, to just kind of grab all my keys and tokens to set that up and put that into my YAML file, which is pretty cool. And actually what I like about working in this way is that you can actually combine lots of different services together. And especially if you have like a more complicated code base and you want to monitor a couple of things that are using the OpenTelemetry framework, this is actually a really great way to kind of go about doing it. So I really like kind of having it in that way. And then also just setting up a YAML file just to put in your Elastic endpoint and your bearer token. That's always like a fun way of doing that as well. So from here, I can actually just do this make start, and then that kind of will allow me to kind of run my Docker container and have everything kind of up and running from here. So you can actually see it's the Docker compose, and then from here it just kind of starts a ton of services, which kind of can show you kind of what that looks like, which is pretty cool. And then from here, it kind of will spin up, once it's running locally, a telescope site, and then from here you can see all of the services inside of the Elastic backend, which is something that I think is really cool. So from here, you can actually see it there's more services running than just the 2 I had up and running before. And then from here, you can kind of see the front-end proxy, all of that as well. So yeah, and I want to show that because that's a little bit more of like a realistic application. So there's kind of 2 ways you can do this. So you can use kind of, for infrastructure metrics and logs, you could use the collector. And then for application metrics, traces, and logs, you can use your language SDKs. And then you can feed that into whatever observability framework you want to work with. So let's talk a little bit about the state of adoption for OpenTelemetry. It is a work in progress. I found that I've only been using OpenTelemetry for about 7 months now, and it is a lot easier to work with than when I first started. And somebody I was talking with was like, yeah, it just keeps getting better all the time. And I think that's a really great way of thinking about it, which is that it really does kind of get better, and it is something that is pretty cool. Especially because it was kind of a merger of 2 competing protocols and took a little bit from both. So one of the things is it is still in development. So if you go to this OpenTelemetry statuses, it's not what I wanted to happen, but that's cool. You can see here that everything is kind of stable or in development. And then for Python, it's stable for both traces and metrics, and then logs are still in development. And that's just based on kind of how the project came to be, in my understanding. And I have a couple of closing thoughts. OpenTelemetry is an open source and vendor neutral observability framework. It is designed to work with any backend system. It is very easy to start instrumenting your code because you don't know what you're going to find to be useful. And it's highly configurable and extensible, so you can make it your own for your own services. And it scales really well from large applications to small applications. So the way that I showed you with the simple application isn't much different from how you would instrument a larger application. Let me know if this talk inspires you to build anything. I'm Jessica Garson on those platforms. Thanks.